Have time for your favorite Frank Wycheck stories coming up in just a few minutes at 615-737-1045 in the F&M Bank chat as we stream live on Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. And joining us now on the phone lines, he is former Tennessee Titan, our very good friend, Brad Hopkins. Brad, good morning.
Good morning, Ramon Kayla and Will. How are you guys this morning?
We're
Brad.
doing all right. We have spent a lot of time reflecting and reminiscing on the legendary life and career of Titans tight end Frank Wycheck. Brad, as you remember him, your former teammate, what do you think of the most when you remember Frank Wycheck?
You know, unfortunately, we used to make fun of his condition, the condition of him getting concussed a lot, because we were just ignorant to, I guess, the long-term effects of suffering so many hits that Frank took. And I remember sharing with my wife maybe a couple of years ago how we used to just go Frankie Wycheck and talk about, like, you know, almost act as if you were a loony, because that in essence sometimes was how it seemed when you talked to him. And it wasn't funny. And it took a long time for us to realize, you know, once concussions became mainstream and talking about it and dialoguing about the effects and how we can make the game safer. It just, you know, when you look back at some of the things you did as dumb kids, and, you know, even though you were a teammate, and we all wished each other well, of course, on the field. I mean, it's a risk that everybody takes. But just taking light of that, you know, that's something that I'll always remember and always regret, really, because, you know, it affects your decision-making. It affects everything that you do, your quality of life. And we could never have foreseen the magnitude of how that was going to affect his life. You know, something that we took just so simple. I remember back in the day when we used to get knocked out, fellas, and you remember, Ramon, they just grab out one of those little smelling salt tablets and stick it under your nose, and off you went. You know, it took us a long time to realize that, you know, we needed to be more aware of how these hits to our head affect us and how ultimately they were going to affect our lives. So that's something I hugely regret doing, but, you know, I was a part of that.
Brad, we talked earlier with David Beauclair, who told us that Frank really played every day like he was an undrafted rookie, and really played every day in practice and in games thinking he was going to get cut the next week if he didn't totally bring it. Did you see that from him, and just what was it like sharing a practice field, a locker room with a guy who was truly bringing 110% and bringing his lunch pail every day to the practice field?
He was an unassuming superstar. I think that whenever you're released from a team and you get a new lease in life, it kind of puts things in a different perspective. And I think that him playing for Washington for those couple of years before he found his way to Houston, it sobered him. And I think that him getting a chance to get out there on the football field with us and continue to do something that he was passionate about, I think that he took it in a different perspective. So it wasn't a surprise that he didn't look at himself like somebody that, you know, deserved accolades. You know, he was a guy that was one of us. And his personality, to me, just really, it didn't take on that life. You know what I mean? He was just one of us, just a regular guy. You know, didn't want any more than anybody else, didn't want any less than anybody else. Was always a hard worker. I mean, made plays when we made plays, and, of course, made as many mistakes as the rest of us did. And he took those mistakes to heart to not want to make them again. So that's not a surprise, Will, that you bring up the fact that, you know, he just never looked at himself as somebody that, you know, that deserved to be on the Ring of Honor for the Tennessee Titans. But he certainly will deserve to be.
Brad Hopkins with us this morning. We're talking Frank Wycheck. And, Brad, you bring up a real point that I brought up in the 7, man. It was a little bit of I said, you know, football players deserve to grow old too, right? And, of course, what you mentioned, of course, the mental health, physical health, whether it be substance or just, you know, of the body, of the mind, right? I tell people all the time that transition out of the game can be a little bit different for everybody. Everybody's got a different walk and different circle, man. And I'm glad you brought some awareness to that, Brad. That's major props to you being a teammate of him, being able to speak on that too.
You know, Ramon, you know exactly what I'm talking about when you talk about this weird fraternity that that Frank and I both spent, and you spent so much time committing our lives to. There's no other profession that you can pour so much of your soul into, and the expiration date leaves you still at a very young age. We hang out together, we eat together, we study together, and sometimes we live together. Blaine was my roommate for a couple of years before he finally moved out on his own. But then that peer group dissolves, it disappears, because inevitably you've got to go on and do something else in life. And it's usually not with the person that you bled with, that you broke bread with, that you just camaraderized with. That's even the word. And you're left kind of figuring it out. Everybody's process is different. And the thing that we know the most, it just gets taken away from you. And nobody knows when that timetable is. So it just, it's a risk that we all take, and a risk that every single one of us that steps on the football field takes. And I think that to some degree we acknowledge it, but to be a really good player, you can't put that in your focus. Like, all these things can happen to me. Hell, it can even happen to kickers, right, Ryan Stonehouse? Mm-hmm. So we all inevitably face injury, and sometimes it takes you away from the game, but you just hope that you can continue to do what you do, because you're really not sure what's next. It's hard to even plan for the future when so much of your focus has to be preparing day to day, to get better. But no one tells you, hey, you know what? When this thing is over, you're guaranteed X, Y, and Z. You're not. No one's even guaranteeing you a job at my age. So this isn't a pity party for professional athletes, but it is, a unique industry that has its perils. And life quality is one of those. The things that are debilitative to us don't usually kick in until you're in your 40s and 50s. I got a new knee back in July last year after spending about 10 years, putting it off just because I didn't want to have it replaced again, And I remember trying to walk to an airport terminal and having to stop and just gather myself for a number of years, just this part of it, and tossing and turning in a hotel bedroom. And my wife telling me, you know what, buddy, you're going to go see Dr. Burton Elrod because you're not keeping me up anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happens, So it's just one of those things, man. When you play in an industry like professional sports, especially football, when it's such a physical, violent nature, and injury is inevitable, and then trying to figure out what's next in life, you just hope that transition isn't as perilous as some of the stories that are always surrounding us.
No doubt, man. And I'll say this before I ask my next question to you. I'm always on the forefront of football technology, safety, helmets, shoulder pads, cleats, taking out the crackback block, although we've all loved what it was. But, Brad, it's understandable now seeing guys in this era deal with this type of stuff as to why this stuff has to change. And that crackback block that we all love and he got jacked up, the game is still physical. It's never going anywhere and will never not be physical either. But I'm all for the GPSing, guys having days off. Like, I get it. It seems soft. But, Brad, I think you can speak to it. You understand that it's still not soft. Like, it takes a certain type of person to play this sport.
Yeah, I mean, we'll make fun of today's game, Ramon, and say that it's not like the game that we played and there's not as many risks that are taken. And that's true. But you also still have to remember the premise of the game itself. The premise of the game is to break the guy's will across from you. And how do you do that? By hurting him, by making him physically feel something that he doesn't want to feel, breaking his will. And, to that degree, that's what the game is founded on. And people tune in to watch it and buy tickets to see that violence, But taking the unnecessary risks out of the game, I think that was definitely necessary. And acknowledging the repercussions of that physicality are something also that I think is smart and brought to the forefront. So that way players can play longer. You want to see these guys play as long as Bruce did and as long as I did. And, and that's a very rare situation because of the physical nature of the game itself. But the game is designed to say, hey, you know what, as players, if you smack that guy in the mouth just hard enough, he's not going to play against you as hard as he possibly can. And that goal sometimes is at the detriment of the people that we play with.
Brad Hopkins joining us now on Ramon, Kayla, and Will. Brad, take us inside that locker room as a teammate. And we get to kind of see as journalists and media members how these teammates interact, right, during that time where we're in their space. As a teammate, what was he like? And is there any story that kind of stands out to you?
He played in every stupid reindeer game that we played, Kayla. And when I say stupid reindeer games, you would never think that grown adults would roll up a ball of tape and almost play volleyball or dodgeball or, just the stupid stuff that we did to pass the time. He was one of us to do that. Linemen are particularly known, doing these kind of things. We would play movie games, Kayla, like we would try and guess a movie that a like actor was in, and if you didn't guess it, you were out. I mean, these are the things that we did. It was almost childlike, but it was almost necessary to keep your sanity. And Frank was one of those guys that did exactly what we did every single time. He was one of us. He was a lineman that wore tight end's number, and obviously we know that most tight ends are extensions of the offensive line anyway because they do just about as much blocking as they do catching. But his active and willing participation to be a goofball like one of us in the kangaroo court, those are the things that I'll always remember about Frank. Quick story about Frank. We were in the Astrodome. I think that we were on the goal line about to go in and score a touchdown. And Frank jumped off sides. And he just screamed, "I suck!" And I remember him getting the attention. Like, we all looked at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? Who are you, first off? Because we really didn't even acknowledge the fact that we got him, that we picked him up because it wasn't like he was there in training camp. It just came out of nowhere. But I remember just even looking across to the defense we were playing against, and they looked at us like, the hell's wrong with this dude? It was funny at that moment, but it kind of showed you, who he was, just really self-deprecating and knowing that he did something that, affected us, and it pissed him off that it did, but that was Frank, and it was a funny moment that we laughed about later on, but in that moment it was just like absolutely crazy that he yelled at himself in such a dramatic fashion that we all had to pause and take notice of what this guy was doing. But we ended up scoring the touchdown anyway, just from 5 yards further than the way when we started.
That's great, Brad. Brad Hopkins joining us on RKW. We talked to David Beauclair earlier, obviously covered you guys, had some really great stories about Frank. I asked Beauclair, I said, was there a point where you thought, oh, this guy's going to transition into media? He brought up you and said, we knew that Brad was probably going to transition. We didn't quite know about Frank. Was there a moment, though, that you said, okay, Frank could be good for the media side?
Yeah, it took a minute when he and Mike were working the game, for me to acknowledge the fact that, hey, this guy's pretty good. Because him relating to the game as it unfolded was something that was natural to him because he played for so long and he was so successful at what he did, understanding the game from a different perspective. But I'm like you, Kayla. I didn't see him really necessarily transitioning into being a broadcaster. But once he started doing it, it made sense. He did it for so long that I thought that it just became second nature to him, like I just said. And it was fun listening to him. It was fun listening to his perspective. It was a different energy. Mike has always been the voice of the Titans and did everything to set the table. And, Frank was just the side pieces that you needed to have a great meal. And he did a tremendous job at it. And it's unfortunate that, he had to take a break to get himself right. And unfortunately, the game keeps moving. Things keep evolving, and he wasn't able to get back in line where he was. That's just unfortunate. But I didn't see it. But once he started doing it, I knew that this guy was talented enough. He was smart enough to get himself in a position to understand how this industry works and to try and take full advantage of that to make a new career. I was actually happy for him, Kayla, that he found something because so many of us don't. And I'll be honest, I used his model. When I decided to retire after they released me and I went to a few teams to see if, in fact, there was any interest, I said, you know what? Frank's doing a great job on the radio. That's what I'm going to do. There's no sense in avoiding the inevitable. I might as well get going now rather than chase a few more dollars for a couple of years, even though I don't think physically I was able to do it anyway. But, yeah, he looked like he was having so much fun that, I think that we all just wanted to do it, but I was just happy that he found a new identity.
Brad Hopkins, former Titan, has been our guest this morning, remembering the late Frank Wycheck. Brad, excellent stuff as always. We really appreciate the time.
You guys take care.
Thanks, Brad.
Yes, sir. There's Brad Hopkins with us this morning here on RKW, remembering his former teammate and our former host right here on The Zone, and Frank Wycheck.